I want to talk about the parallels between Moses, or Moshe, and Yeshua, Jesus, related to Deuteronomy 18:18, which says, I will raise up a prophet from among their countrymen like you, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And by the way, that part where I will put my words in him, Christ said several times, I do not come on my own initiative, but on the initiative of my Father. And what I see the Father doing, I do. What the Father tells me to speak, I speak. That's what Christ, Yeshua, Jesus, was saying. But let's go back to compare Moshe, and Christ. If you go back to Exodus 1, or actually Exodus 2, where Moses was born, Naaman went and married a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son. She hid him for 3 months. And, basically she put him in a wicker basket. Then the Pharaoh's daughter found him and had the mother breastfeed him to grow up. And then Moses goes into the wilderness, where Moses goes into the wilderness, you might think of maybe where Christ was led into the wilderness to be tempted. I don't know if that was part of what happened with Moses, but I see a kind of a similarity there. And also, maybe in a sense, he was called out of Egypt, just like Christ. When you read in Matthew 2, after it talks about the genealogy, you read in Matthew 2 where it talks about Herod seeking the child, about the wise men coming, and then Herod seeks to kill all the kids 2 years and older, which is in verse in Bethlehem. Of course, the fact that Christ came from Bethlehem, a house of bread, is kind of interesting when he says, I'm the bread of life. Which also you see in the manna, I think, because they had to eat the manna day by day. But basically, in verse 16, it talks about the kids being slain up to 2 years old. So they went down to Egypt with Yeshua, Jesus, and then there's a prophecy that out of Egypt I call my son, and so he comes out of Egypt back to the land. Christ does. But if you read the book of Exodus 1 through 11 in particular, you read about all the 10 plagues and the firstborn being killed, which, it's about, and you see also in Torah about the firstborn being redeemed. uh, with a silver or whatever, that they're redeemed, and because God had chosen the people, those of Levi, to be priests, or the Levites to be the ones in the uh, to be the ones with the responsible for the tabernacle and temple, and of course Aaron, being Moses' brother, was who would also have been a Levite, was of the priesthood line, the high priest, and the priest. He was the high priest. His sons were priests, and we go on from there. But and you read that Christ is a priest according to the order of Melchizedek. That's in Hebrews 6, I believe. You'd have to look that up. But you have, just as you have the Israelites led out of Egypt, Moses, and they go through the Red Sea, and then they receive the law. And I'm going to explain some parallels there in a second. And then they receive the law, then they go and wander through the wilderness, which obviously they were led by God, but for the sake of a better term, they were wandering in the wilderness because of their unfaithfulness when the 12 spies went to spy out the land. But anyway, Moses led the people out of Egypt, just as Christ leads us out of our Egypt of sin, or Babylon. Same difference. I mean, in a sense, where was Rebecca? In Ur, which was basically where Babylon ended up being, or in that, what became Babylon later. So you have the Christ representing the Passover lamb, which is what the Last Supper was about, partaking of it, just as they partook of the lamb, in which you read in Exodus 12, about the ordinance of the Passover lamb, about it's supposed to be roasted, and it's supposed to, you don't leave any of it till morning, several different things. But Christ leads us out of that, which is the outer court, I believe. It goes through the Red Sea, just as you have the laver that cleanses people. And yes, I'm tying some of this into the tabernacle because it's all tied together. But it's like people accept Christ, they're baptized, then the Holy Spirit, like with Christ, the Holy Spirit came upon him, at least in the text, as a dove, but it was after he was baptized. What happened with Moses and those people? They came through the Red Sea, leaving Egypt. That's when they finally left Egypt, was when they went through the Red Sea and baptism, which 1 Corinthians 10 talks about. Okay? And then they received the law at Mount Sinai. So the Holy Spirit comes upon us, and you can read in John 16 about what the Holy Spirit's job is, and also helps us in prayer. But I see parallels there where we delivered from Egypt, which is what Christ did, and we enter through his flesh into the holy place, which you read in Hebrews 10:19 through 22, that we have access to the holy place, which was why the veil was rent. People will talk about, oh well, the veil did away with the law, whatever. No. For one, they don't define which veil. The veil was rent. Well, which one? The one from the people separating the outer court from the camp? The one that separates the outer court from the inner court? The one that separates the inner court from the Holy of Holies? Which veil was it? So something to think about. But Christ also lived a sinless life. Moses was not sinless, but he led the people out, and the water, it's not by accident that, Moses struck the rock the first time. He was supposed to speak to it the second time, which he messed up the picture that God was trying to draw there. And he says, you have treated me as unholy, whatever. And it prevented Moses from going into the promised land at the time. So, and then Christ says, I am the water of life. He who partakes of me shall not. Like the woman at the well, for example, is what comes to mind for me. I am the living water. And that's the whole point, is he is the living water. He is the bread of life that sustained them, the bread and water that sustained them in the wilderness, as he does for us now. And the Holy Spirit guides us. The Holy Spirit I would compare to the pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire that led them through the wilderness, just as the Holy Spirit leads us through this wilderness after we leave Egypt, after we accept Christ, are baptized, and then we receive the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit plays into read, pray, and obey. He teaches us as we read, he helps us to pray, and he helps us to obey. And as we obey, as we shine, which I believe is what obedience is, that's how we become a light. That's how Christ was a light to the world, because he taught people how to live. And even John talks about we ought to walk as he walked. I believe that's in 1 John. We ought to walk as he walked, abide in him. And the thing about abiding is in John 15, as far as what Christ said about it. And then it's talked about later in 1 John about abiding, loving our neighbor, those sorts of things. But basically, he leads us from the outer court to the inner court, from Egypt to the inner court, and then when he returns, he will lead us from the inner court to the Holy of Holies for the wedding, which I believe is why you have a huppah in a Jewish wedding. So hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully it's helpful for your growth, and I just pray that it is a blessing to you. Shalom, shalom, and may Yahweh bless and keep you and make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you and give you peace.